Chapter 1. The Foundations of Connection. To truly master the art of navigating human relationships, you must first cultivate something that cannot be taught in any manual or forced upon you by any instructor. You must develop a deep, driving desire to understand the people around you. Without this burning curiosity, without a genuine willingness to step outside your own perspective, all the techniques in the world will fall flat. You have to picture how much richer your daily existence will be when you finally learn to harmonize with the personalities that fill your life. This is not merely about acquiring a new set of social tactics. It is about adopting an entirely new way of living. It requires practice, patience, and a commitment to catching yourself in the act of falling back into old, destructive habits. Learning to connect with others is an active, ongoing process, and the very first lesson you must internalize is also the most difficult to practice. There is a fundamental truth about human nature that we all tend to forget when we are frustrated. If you want to gather honey, you cannot kick over the beehive. It sounds incredibly simple, yet it is a rule we violate almost every single day. When someone makes a mistake, our immediate, primal instinct is to point it out, to correct them, and to deliver a stinging critique. We believe that by showing someone exactly where they went wrong, we are helping them, or at the very least, we are vindicating our own sense of right and wrong. But this approach fundamentally misunderstands the creature we are dealing with. When we interact with other people, we are not interacting with creatures of pure, unadulterated logic. We are dealing with creatures of profound emotion, creatures who are deeply motivated by their own pride, their vanity, and an intense desire to protect their own self-worth. Consider someone in your own life who has made a colossal, undeniable mistake. Perhaps it is a colleague who completely mismanaged a critical project, ignoring warnings, alienating the team, and ultimately costing the company a significant amount of money and reputation. When the dust settled and the inevitable termination occurred, did that person walk away acknowledging their flaws? Did they say that they brought this upon themselves through their own arrogance and incompetence? It is highly unlikely. Instead, they almost certainly constructed a narrative in which they were the victim. They blamed the shifting market conditions, the lack of support from upper management, the incompetence of their subordinates, and the unrealistic deadlines they were handed. They rationalized every poor decision until it looked like the only logical choice. This is not an anomaly. This is the standard operating procedure of the human mind. 99 times out of 100, people do not criticize themselves for anything, no matter how entirely wrong they may be. Because people are naturally wired to justify their own actions, criticism is entirely futile. It puts the other person immediately on the defensive. The moment you level a harsh critique at someone, their mental energy stops focusing on the problem at hand and shifts entirely toward building a fortress to protect their ego. Criticism is dangerous because it wounds a person's precious pride, hurts their sense of importance, and arouses a bitter resentment that can last for years. Even if your criticism is entirely factual, the recipient will not hear the logic. They will only feel the sting of the attack. They will strive to justify themselves and, more often than not, they will turn around and condemn you in return. You cannot force someone to realize they are wrong by battering them with your own rightness. Think about the intense pressure of a modern workplace where deadlines loom and mistakes have real consequences. Imagine a dedicated project manager who has been working 80-hour weeks to launch a new product. On the eve of the launch, she discovers that a key vendor, managed by one of her team members, has completely failed to deliver a crucial component. The launch is ruined. The manager is exhausted, humiliated, and furious. In the heat of the night, she sits at her computer and types out a blistering, scorching email to the team member. She details every instance of his incompetence, every ignored warning, and the catastrophic nature of his failure. Writing the email feels incredibly satisfying. It allows her to blow off the steam that has been building up for months. But right before she hits send, she stops and looks out the window into the dark street. She realizes that sending this email will not bring the missing component back. It will not fix the launch. All it will do is humiliate the employee, force him to defend himself, and permanently destroy any chance of them ever working effectively together again. It will make him a bitter enemy who feels misunderstood and unfairly attacked. So she deletes the email. She understands that sharp rebukes and harsh criticisms almost invariably end in futility. The urge to criticize is not just a professional hazard. It is a toxin that frequently poisons our most intimate personal relationships, especially within our families. We often demand perfection from the people we love the most, measuring them against an impossible yardstick of our own making. Picture a parent who returns home from a grueling day at work, carrying the heavy stress of the world on their shoulders. As they walk through the door, they immediately see the flaws in their home. They scold their teenage son for leaving his shoes in the hallway. They criticize him for the careless way he completed his chores, for his posture at the dinner table, and for the tone of his voice. Throughout the evening, the only interactions they have are corrections and reprimands. The parent feels they are building character, preparing the child for a harsh world. But later that night, as the house falls quiet, the parent walks past the child's bedroom and looks in at the sleeping figure. A crushing wave of remorse washes over them. They realize that their child had run up to them earlier, throwing their arms around them with pure, unadulterated affection, and the parent had responded with irritation and a critique about messy clothes. The parent realizes they have been measuring a child by the standards of a weary adult. The habit of finding fault, of reprimanding, has become an automatic reflex, a reward for simply being a child. The parent kneels by the bed, deeply ashamed, recognizing that the child possesses a heart as wide and generous as the dawn, and that constant criticism is slowly withering that beautiful spirit. They resolve in that quiet, dark room to bite their tongue, to stop condemning, and to start understanding. Any fool can criticize, condemn, and complain, and most fools do exactly that. It takes absolutely no effort to point out the flaws in others. But it takes true character, immense self-control, and profound emotional maturity to be understanding and forgiving. Instead of condemning people, we must train ourselves to figure out why they do what they do. We must try to understand the pressures they are under, the fears that drive them, and the pride they are trying so desperately to protect. This approach breeds sympathy, tolerance, and genuine kindness. When you truly understand all the forces acting upon a person, it becomes nearly impossible to condemn them. Before you seek to regulate and improve the people around you, look inward. Improving yourself and controlling your own impulsive urges to judge is far more profitable and far less dangerous than trying to fix everyone else. If you want to build lasting, meaningful connections, you must forever bury the urge to kick over the beehive. Chapter 2. The Engine of Motivation. There is only one way under high heaven to get anybody to do anything. Have you ever stopped to truly consider that? There is just one way. You can, of course, force a person to hand over their wallet by pointing a weapon at them. You can command an employee to work late by threatening their livelihood. You can force a child to clean their room through the use of fear and intimidation. But these crude, forceful methods always carry disastrous repercussions. They breed resentment, destroy trust, and ultimately create enemies. The only genuine way to get you to do anything is by giving you exactly what you want. What is it that you want? The list of human necessities is surprisingly short. We want health and the preservation of our lives. We want food, sleep, money, and the security to care for our families. Most of these basic desires are, for the average person, reasonably satisfied. But there is one longing that is almost as deep, almost as imperious as the desire for food or sleep, yet it is rarely gratified. It is a gnawing, unfaltering human hunger. It is the craving to be appreciated, the profound desire to be important. This is not merely a passing wish. It is an absolute necessity of the human soul. The rare individual who learns how to honestly and sincerely satisfy this heart hunger holds the ultimate key to human relations. This burning urge to be recognized is the primary difference between mankind and the animal kingdom. Animals are satisfied with a warm place to sleep and enough to eat. But human beings are driven to build towering skyscrapers, write breathtaking symphonies, and amass wealth far beyond what they could ever spend in a single lifetime, all to satisfy this burning desire for significance. It is the reason you wear the clothes you wear, drive the car you drive, and proudly share stories about your children's accomplishments. When this craving is starved, people will do desperate things to feed it. But when it is nourished, people will move mountains for you. Imagine a man who takes ownership of a struggling, run-down diner on the edge of a Midwestern town. The business is failing, but worse than that, the staff is deeply cynical. The cooks are perpetually angry, the waitstaff is indifferent, and the turnover is constant. A lesser manager would walk in on day one and lay down the law. He would threaten jobs, point out every greasy counter, and demand immediate respect. But this new owner understands the deep hunger of human ego. For the first 2 weeks, he does not issue a single order. Instead, he watches. He notices that the gruff, uncommunicative night baker has an incredibly precise method for kneading the dough, resulting in a texture that is light and flawless. He notices that the most cynical waiter on the floor has a spectacular, almost photographic memory for the regular customer's orders. One evening, the owner pulls the night baker aside. He does not offer a hollow compliment. He looks her in the eye and tells her that he has worked in the restaurant industry for 30 years and has never seen anyone handle dough with such absolute mastery. He tells her that her bread is the quiet heartbeat of the restaurant. He asks her advice on how to improve the rest of the menu. The shift in her demeanor is instantaneous and profound. The hardened exterior cracks, and a light returns to her eyes. He does the same with the cynical waiter, praising his phenomenal memory in front of the entire staff, calling it a rare gift that makes every customer feel like a VIP. The owner did not hand out raises, nor did he alter the menu or remodel the dining room. He simply fed their starved self-esteem. He gave them the feeling of importance they had been desperately lacking. Within weeks, the atmosphere of the diner transformed. The baker began coming in early to experiment with new pastries. The waiter began greeting customers with genuine warmth. The staff began working together, not because they were afraid of being fired, but because they felt valued. They were performing at their highest level because they wanted to, because someone had finally recognized their worth. Sincere appreciation is the fuel that drives the engine of human motivation. But to truly harness this engine, we must understand another fundamental reality. We must learn how to bait the hook to suit the fish. When you go fishing, you do not bait your hook with the foods you personally enjoy. You might be incredibly fond of roasted chicken or chocolate cake, but you know that the fish do not care about your preferences. To catch the fish, you must dangle a worm or a grasshopper in the water. You must offer them what they want. It is an incredibly simple concept, yet we routinely abandon this common sense when we are fishing for the minds and hearts of other people. We spend our days talking about what we want. We talk about our quotas, our desires, our needs, and our deadlines. It is childish and absurd. Of course, you are interested in what you want. You are eternally interested in it. But absolutely no one else is. The rest of the world is just like you. They are entirely focused on what they want. Therefore, the only way on earth to influence other people is to talk about what they want and to show them exactly how to get it. Consider a young entrepreneur trying to secure a commercial lease for her first retail store. She finds the perfect location, a beautiful, historic storefront with exposed brick and high ceilings. But the rent is exorbitant, far beyond her modest budget. She secures a meeting with the landlord, a stoic, retired contractor who has owned the building for 40 years. If she goes into that meeting talking about her dreams, her tight budget, and how much she wants the space, she will fail. The landlord does not care about her budget. He cares about his own interests. So, she does her research. She learns that the landlord renovated the building himself decades ago, pouring his own sweat and craftsmanship into the woodwork. When she sits down with him, she does not mention her financial constraints. Instead, she talks about his building. She speaks with genuine reverence about the intricate detail of the crown molding and the durability of the hardwood floors. She tells him that she wants to design her store to highlight his original craftsmanship, not cover it up with cheap modern fixtures. She paints a vivid picture of a quiet, respectable boutique that will attract high-end clientele who will appreciate the history of the space, ensuring that his legacy is protected and maintained perfectly for years to come. By the time she finishes, the landlord is looking at her not as a financial risk, but as a partner in preserving his life's work. She has tapped directly into his desires. When she finally presents the rent figure she can afford, he does not dismiss her. He negotiates. He finds a way to make it work because she has aroused in him an eager want to have her as a tenant. She aligned her goals with his desires so seamlessly that he felt as though renting to her was his own brilliant idea. Every action you have ever taken since the day you were born was performed because you wanted something. Even when you give a large donation to a charity, you are doing it because you want the feeling of contributing to a beautiful, unselfish cause. That feeling is worth more to you than the money you gave. Action springs out of what we fundamentally desire. If you want to persuade anyone, whether in business, in the home, or in the community, you must first arouse in them an eager want. The person who can do this holds the whole world with them. The person who cannot walks a lonely way. When we combine these two realities, the deep human craving for importance and the necessity of speaking to the desires of others, we unlock a profound level of influence. It requires us to step out of our own egos. It requires us to pause before we speak, before we demand, and before we complain, and ask ourselves, how can I make this person want to do it? When you make a habit of looking at the world through the eyes of the people around you, you will never lack for cooperation. Feed their hunger for importance with sincere, unvarnished appreciation, and align your goals with the things they cherish most. Do this, and you will have mastered the grand secret of human motivation. Chapter 3. The Magnetism of Presence. There is a distinct, undeniable energy that certain people carry with them into every room they enter. You have undoubtedly met someone like this. They do not necessarily possess staggering physical beauty, nor are they always the wealthiest or the most successful individuals in the crowd. Yet, the moment they arrive, the atmosphere shifts. People gravitate toward them, conversations flow more easily in their presence, and everyone seems to leave their company feeling strangely uplifted. We often attribute this to some mysterious, innate charisma, assuming it is a genetic gift bestowed upon a lucky few. But this magnetic presence is not magic. It is the result of a specific, highly cultivated outward focus. It is the mastery of showing up in the world not to be seen, but to see others. To understand the core of this magnetism, we only need to look at the most universally beloved creatures on the planet. Think of a loyal dog welcoming its owner home after a long day. A dog does not have to pay rent, it does not have to perform complex tasks, and it certainly does not spend hours plotting how to impress you with its intelligence or its achievements. It earns its keep and your absolute devotion entirely through one simple action. It is genuinely, overwhelmingly thrilled to see you. When you walk through the door, it does not try to get you interested in its day. It throws its entire being into showing how interested it is in yours. It offers a pure, unadulterated enthusiasm for your very existence. Now, contrast this with how we usually behave as humans. We spend agonizing amounts of time and energy trying to force the world to be interested in us. We carefully curate our outward appearances. We memorize clever anecdotes, and we boast about our titles and accomplishments, all in a desperate bid to win attention. But the harsh, unvarnished truth is that people are not interested in you. They are not interested in me. From morning until night, they are almost exclusively interested in themselves. Trying to make friends or build loyalty by waving your own flag is like trying to catch the wind in a net. It is exhausting and ultimately futile. You can make more genuine connections in 2 months by becoming deeply interested in other people than you can in 2 entire years of trying to get them interested in you. Consider the journey of a freelance graphic designer trying to build his business in a highly competitive city. For years, he attended endless networking galas, industry mixers, and corporate dinners. He bought expensive suits he could barely afford. He practiced an elevator pitch that highlighted his awards, his impressive client roster, and his unique design philosophy. He would approach groups of people, wait for a polite opening, and then launch into his rehearsed monologue. And night after night, he would drive home completely exhausted, with a pocket full of business cards that never turned into actual relationships. People listened politely, nodded, and then drifted away. He was trying to be the most interesting person in the room, and it was pushing people away. One evening, utterly burned out, he decided to try a drastically different approach. He made a quiet vow to himself before entering a crowded conference hall. He would not say a single word about his own business unless explicitly pressed. Instead, he would treat everyone he met as if they were the fascinating subject of a documentary he was filming. He struck up a conversation with an older gentleman standing near the catering table. Instead of delivering his pitch, he noticed the man was wearing a highly unusual vintage lapel pin and asked him about its history. It turned out the older man was a passionate amateur historian who spent his weekends restoring forgotten municipal archives. The designer knew absolutely nothing about municipal history, but he leaned in. He asked about the restoration process, the strangest things the man had uncovered, and why the work mattered to him. He listened with rapt, focused attention. He watched the older man's eyes light up as he spoke about his true passion. They talked for nearly an hour, and the designer barely mentioned his own name. As the evening ended, the older man shook his hand vigorously, declaring it the best conversation he had had in years. 2 weeks later, that same man, who happened to sit on the board of a major regional hospital, called the designer and offered him the contract to rebrand their entire health network. The designer had won a massive victory, not by being interesting, but by being genuinely, profoundly interested. This shift in focus from inward to outward must be accompanied by a physical manifestation of that warmth. The expression you wear on your face is infinitely more important than the clothes you wear on your back. A genuine smile is the universal messenger of goodwill. It is a silent, immediate signal that says, "I like you, you make me happy, I am glad to see you." It disarms the heaviest of hearts and melts away the ice of formal, rigid interactions. We are not talking about a mechanical, insincere smirk plastered on the face of a bored salesperson. People have highly tuned radars for authenticity, and a fake smile is deeply resented. We are talking about a rich, heartwarming smile that bubbles up from within, a smile that crinkles the corners of the eyes and radiates a quiet joy. Imagine the atmosphere of a crowded waiting room at an automotive repair shop on a rainy Monday morning. The environment is thick with frustration. People are stressed about the cost of repairs, angry about being late for work, and completely absorbed in their own misery. The room is silent, heavy, and tense. Then, a young father walks in carrying a toddler in his arms. The child is not burdened by deadlines or repair bills. He is simply observing the world. The toddler locks eyes with a stern, grey-haired man sitting in the corner, a man who has been scowling at the clock for 45 minutes. The child gives the man a massive, uninhibited, toothy grin. Watch what happens in that moment. It is almost impossible for human biology to resist. The stern man's face inevitably softens. The heavy lines around his mouth break, and he smiles back. He makes a playful face at the child, and the father chuckles. Suddenly, the man and the father begin chatting about how fast children grow up. A woman sitting nearby overhears and joins in with a story about her own grandchildren. Within 5 minutes, the heavy, miserable silence of the room has been entirely shattered. The tension has evaporated, replaced by a shared, warm humanity. That is the raw, unadulterated power of a single, genuine smile. But what do you do when you are under immense pressure, when your heart is heavy, and you simply do not feel like smiling? The answer lies in a profound psychological truth. Action and feeling are inextricably linked. We often believe that we must feel happy before we can smile. But in reality, if you consciously regulate your actions, your feelings will naturally follow. If you have lost your cheerfulness, the most sovereign path back to it is to sit up cheerfully, to breathe deeply, and to act and speak as if that cheerfulness were already blooming inside you. Force yourself to smile. Hum a tune. Put a spark in your voice. You will find that it is nearly impossible to remain depressed when you are physically acting out the symptoms of joy. This unseen energy even travels through telephone wires and digital screens. When you answer a call with a scowl on your face, your voice sounds flat, cold, and transactional. But when you consciously put a smile on your face before picking up the receiver, that physical act changes the shape of your vocal cords. Your voice suddenly carries a lilt, a warmth, and a welcoming tone. The person on the other end, though they cannot see you, immediately feels that you are glad to hear from them. They feel valued before the conversation has even truly begun. The magnetism of presence is your daily signature. Everywhere you go, you leave a trail of emotional energy behind you. You have the power to walk into a room and drain the life out of it with a sour, self-absorbed demeanor, or you can choose to be the sunlight that breaks through the clouds. When you fix your mind firmly on the great and splendid things you want to do, when you project an attitude of courage, frankness, and good cheer, you literally transform the environment around you. Step out into the world with your head held high, drink in the sunshine, greet your colleagues and strangers alike with a beaming face, and pour your soul into every interaction. Make the conscious choice to be deeply fascinated by the people you meet. When you do this, you will never have to beg for attention or loyalty. The world will naturally and joyfully open its doors to you. Chapter 4. The Art of Validation. Every human being walks through the world wearing an invisible heavy sign around their neck that pleads for one simple thing: acknowledge my existence. In a sprawling, crowded universe of billions, we are all silently terrified of being entirely forgettable. We want to know that we leave a mark, that our presence shifts the air in the room, and that if we were to vanish tomorrow, someone would notice the empty space we left behind. This desperate craving for validation is the bedrock of all human interaction. When you learn how to masterfully validate the people around you, you do not just win their favor, you win their absolute, unwavering loyalty. This art of validation begins with the most fundamental marker of human identity, and it is cemented by the rarest gift one person can offer another. The first step in this art requires us to recognize the profound psychological weight of a single word. To any individual, their own name is the sweetest, most important sound in any language. It is the label of their identity, the singular word that separates them from the anonymous, faceless crowd. When you remember someone's name, you are paying them a subtle, incredibly powerful compliment. You are effectively saying that they made enough of an impression on you, that they are significant enough in the grand scheme of your life to warrant space in your memory. Conversely, when you forget a name, mispronounce it, or simply refuse to learn it, you are delivering a quiet but devastating insult. You are communicating that they are invisible, interchangeable, and unimportant. Imagine a man who works the overnight shift at a massive, bustling regional distribution center. For years, he has walked the same concrete floors, scanned the same endless rows of barcodes, and watched the same fluorescent lights flicker overhead. To the corporation, he often feels like little more than an employee identification number on a spreadsheet. He does his job diligently, but he feels entirely unseen, a replaceable cog in a gigantic, uncaring machine. One morning, the regional director of operations visits the facility for a routine inspection. The director is a busy woman, responsible for thousands of employees across several states. As she walks down the aisle, surrounded by managers with clipboards, she stops. She turns directly to the night shift worker, smiles warmly, and greets him by his first name. She does not stop there. She asks him how his daughter is doing, specifically referencing the difficult college application process he had briefly mentioned during a 5-minute conversation they shared at a holiday luncheon over a year ago. In that fleeting moment, the entire emotional landscape of the warehouse worker shifts. He is no longer an invisible cog. He is a distinct human being, a father, a person whose life matters enough to be remembered by someone who interacts with thousands of people. The director did not give him a raise or a promotion that morning, but she gave him something infinitely more valuable. She gave him dignity. She validated his existence. By simply taking the time and energy to fix his name and a detail of his life securely in her mind, she earned a level of dedication and respect that no amount of financial incentive could ever buy. But remembering a name is only the doorway to validation. Once you have invited someone in by acknowledging their identity, you must prove that their thoughts, their experiences, and their feelings actually hold weight. You do this through a practice that is astonishingly rare in our modern, frantic world, the practice of deep, unadulterated listening. True listening is not merely the act of remaining silent while the other person speaks. It is not waiting patiently for your turn to talk, all while secretly formulating your brilliant rebuttal in the back of your mind. True listening is an intense, active form of generosity. It is sitting perfectly present, focusing all of your mental and emotional energy on the person in front of you and absorbing their words without immediate judgment or interruption. There is a kind of magic that occurs when a person feels truly, deeply heard. It can completely diffuse the most explosive situations and heal profound wounds. Consider a high-stakes scenario involving a furious, red-faced client who has stormed into the office of a software consulting firm. A critical software implementation has gone disastrously wrong, bringing the client's business to a grinding halt. The client is livid, waving a printed contract, threatening lawsuits, and preparing to loudly cancel a multi-million-dollar account. An inexperienced consultant would immediately jump into a defensive posture. They would start quoting service-level agreements, blaming technical glitches, and trying to logically explain away the failure. They would attempt to win the argument, but a seasoned, masterful consultant takes a completely different path. She sits down, looks the furious client directly in the eyes, and simply listens. She allows the client to rage, to vent, and to pour out every ounce of their frustration. She does not interrupt to correct minor factual errors. She does not defend her team. She nods, she maintains compassionate eye contact, and she gives the client a massive, uninterrupted stage upon which to air their grievances. She understands that the client is not just angry about a software bug. The client is terrified about their own reputation, stressed about lost revenue, and desperate to regain a sense of control. The client rants for 20 uninterrupted minutes, and then a fascinating biological shift occurs. Having unloaded all the heavy, toxic energy of their anger, and having met absolutely no resistance, the client's shoulders physically drop. The volume of their voice lowers. The furious storm burns itself out, entirely extinguished by the calm, absorbing ocean of the consultant's attention. By the time the client finishes, the hostility has evaporated. Only then does the consultant speak, calmly acknowledging the severity of the problem and offering a path forward. The contract is saved, and the relationship is ultimately strengthened, not because of a brilliant technical excuse, but because the consultant offered the ultimate validation. She provided a safe harbor for the client's distress. She proved that even the most venomous critic will eventually soften and be subdued in the presence of a patient, sympathetic listener. This profound truth extends far beyond the boardroom and deep into the sanctuary of our own homes. We are often the worst listeners with the people we love the most. We are so invested in their happiness that the moment they bring us a problem, we immediately try to fix it. We offer unsolicited advice, we tell them how to handle their conflicts, and we rush to provide solutions. But quite often, people do not want an engineer to fix their lives. They want an audience to witness their struggle. Think of a father who is desperately trying to connect with his teenage daughter. Every day she comes home from school looking exhausted and withdrawn. Whenever she complains about the intense social pressure, the heavy homework load, or the drama with her friends, the father immediately jumps in with logical solutions. He tells her how to manage her time, how to ignore petty gossip, and how to stay focused on her future. Yet, the more he tries to solve her problems, the more she pulls away, slamming her bedroom door and shutting him out. He is baffled, believing he is providing excellent fatherly advice. He fails to realize that his daughter does not need his logic. She needs his empathy. By rushing to fix the problem, he is subtly implying that her feelings are just an obstacle to be cleared away, a puzzle to be solved. One evening, completely out of options, he decides to simply shut his mouth. When she begins to cry over a failed chemistry exam and a misunderstanding with her best friend, he does not offer a single piece of advice. He just sits on the edge of the couch, looks at her with immense tenderness, and says that it sounds incredibly hard. He lets her cry. He lets her talk until the words run out. He gives her the rapt, undivided attention of his heart. In that quiet space, free from judgment and correction, the wall between them crumbles. She leans her head on his shoulder, feeling completely understood. When we give someone our exclusive attention, we are handing them a profound psychological gift. We are telling them that in this specific moment, out of everything happening in the world, nothing is more fascinating or important than their voice. If you want to be known as a captivating conversationalist, you rarely need to be the one doing the talking. You simply need to ask the questions that other people desperately want to answer, encourage them to unearth their passions, their histories, and their triumphs, validate their existence by remembering exactly who they are, and then grant them the dignity of your total unbroken silence. Chapter 5. Elevating the Individual. Every human mind is a fortress with a heavily guarded door. When we want something from someone, our natural instinct is to try and batter that door down with the sheer force of our own logic, our own needs, and our own desires. We present spreadsheets, we make impassioned pleas, and we lay out our arguments completely bewildered as to why the door remains firmly locked. What we fail to realize is that the lock is on the inside, and it can only be opened by the person standing behind it. If you want someone to willingly turn that deadbolt and invite you in, you must possess the right key. And that key is always carved in the specific shape of the things they treasure most. The royal road to a person's heart is to talk about the subjects that ignite their passion. It is a simple concept, yet we routinely ignore it because our own internal monologue is so loud. We are so consumed by the destination we want to reach that we refuse to walk the path the other person has paved. But when you set aside your own agenda for a moment and sincerely engage with someone on the turf of their own choosing, the resistance you previously faced simply melts away. Imagine an ambitious independent financial advisor trying to secure the portfolio of a notoriously stubborn, highly successful manufacturing executive. For nearly a year, the advisor had been trying to win this account. He sent glossy brochures, he emailed market analyses, and he requested meetings to discuss yield curves and tax-advantaged growth strategies. Whenever he managed to get the executive on the phone, the conversation was brief and glacial. The executive had heard the same pitch from 100 other advisors and had built a massive wall of indifference. The young advisor was pitching numbers, entirely missing the human being sitting across from him. Determined to break the cycle, the advisor completely changed his strategy. He stopped looking at the executive's corporate background and started searching for his personal footprint. He discovered, through a quiet conversation with the executive's receptionist, that the man was fiercely dedicated to a local rescue organization for retired racing greyhounds. He spent every weekend fostering these dogs and helping them rehabilitate. The advisor knew absolutely nothing about greyhounds, but he began to read. He learned about the unique physiology of the breed, the challenges they face adjusting to domestic life, and the specific patience required to train them. The next time the advisor secured a brief 10-minute introductory meeting, he did not bring a single financial chart into the office. He sat down and noticed a framed photograph of a sleek, brindled dog on the executive's desk. Instead of launching into his rehearsed pitch about wealth management, the advisor pointed to the picture and asked if it was one of the rescues he had read about, mentioning the specific challenges of transitioning racing dogs to a home environment. The transformation in the room was absolute and instantaneous. The executive leaned back in his chair, the rigid corporate mask falling away to reveal a warm, passionate human being. His eyes lit up as he talked about the dog in the picture, the injuries it had overcome, and the deep satisfaction he found in watching a frightened animal learn to trust again. They talked for nearly 45 minutes. The advisor listened with rapt, genuine fascination, occasionally asking thoughtful questions based on his recent reading. When the executive finally looked at the clock, realizing how much time had passed, he did not usher the advisor out. Instead, he smiled and said he supposed they should look at those financial documents now. The advisor did not have to sell his services that day. By making the executive's passion the center of the universe, he had proven himself to be someone of uncommon perception and empathy. He had used the right key, and the heavy door swung open effortlessly. Talking in terms of the other person's interests is not a manipulative trick to extract a favor. It is a profound exercise in making someone feel significant. This ties directly into the single most important law of human conduct, a law as old as history itself. You must always make the other person feel important, and you must do it with absolute sincerity. The desire for a feeling of importance is the deepest urge in human nature. When you study the great philosophies and religions of the world, whether it is the teachings of the ancient Stoics or the Golden Rule, they all eventually converge on this exact principle. You want the approval of those you interact with. You want recognition of your true worth. You want to feel that your existence matters in your little corner of the world. Everyone you meet is silently carrying that exact same hunger. Yet we are often incredibly stingy with our praise and our validation. We hoard our appreciation as if giving it away will somehow diminish our own supply. We walk past people every day without truly seeing them, treating them as invisible mechanisms designed merely to facilitate our lives. Picture a bustling corporate headquarters with hundreds of employees swiping their badges and rushing to their desks. In the lobby, there is a custodian who has worked there for 15 years. He is the first to arrive every morning, meticulously polishing the vast expanse of marble flooring until it gleams like glass. Thousands of people walk over his handiwork every single week. Executives in expensive suits track in rain and snow, completely oblivious to the man standing quietly in the corner with a mop. To the vast majority of the building, he is not a person. He is just a function. Now, imagine a newly hired regional director who notices this dynamic. One rainy Tuesday, she arrives early. The lobby floor is immaculate, reflecting the ambient light beautifully, despite the miserable weather outside. Instead of staring at her phone and marching to the elevator, she stops. She walks over to the custodian, introduces herself, and looks him directly in the eyes. She tells him that she has worked in dozens of corporate buildings across the country, but she has never seen a lobby maintained with such absolute, flawless precision. She asks him how he manages to keep the marble looking so perfect despite the heavy foot traffic. For a second, the custodian is speechless. In 15 years, people have complained to him about spills, and they have asked him for directions to the restrooms, but no one has ever stopped to marvel at the quality of his labor. He stands a little taller. A quiet pride washes over his face as he explains the specific environmentally safe compounds he mixes himself to protect the stone without leaving a residue. The director listens carefully, thanks him for making the company look so professional to visiting clients, and heads to her office. She did not give him a bonus, nor did she change his job title. But she gave him something priceless. She elevated him from an invisible worker to a master craftsman. She recognized his true worth and made him feel vital to the success of the entire enterprise. From that day forward, the custodian greets her by name every time she enters the building. If she ever leaves an umbrella in the lobby or drops a document, he guards it with his life. She earned his absolute, unwavering devotion because she followed the golden rule of human interaction. She gave unto him the exact feeling of importance she would want for herself. This philosophy of appreciation can work magic in almost every interaction, from the highest echelons of power to the most fleeting encounters. It works when you sincerely thank a tired food service worker for getting your complex order exactly right. It works when you tell a stressed customer service representative that you appreciate their patience in helping you navigate a frustrating technical issue. Little phrases of courtesy oil the cogs of the monotonous grind of everyday life, but more than that, they are the hallmark of a noble spirit. The unvarnished truth is that almost every person you meet feels themselves superior to you in some specific way. The surest, quickest path to their heart is to let them realize in some subtle but undeniable manner that you recognize their importance. You cannot fake this. Cheap, insincere flattery is easily spotted and universally despised. It must come from the heart out, not the teeth out. It requires you to genuinely look for the good in the other person. If you strip away the titles, the bank accounts, and the outward bravado, you will find that everyone is just trying to navigate the lonely, complex experience of being human. Many people bolster their egos with a show of tumult and conceit, specifically because they feel deeply unappreciated. When you take the time to notice their passions, when you ask them to share their knowledge, and when you shine a warm, sincere spotlight on their unique contributions, you dissolve their insecurities. You give them the emotional nourishment they have been starving for. When you dedicate yourself to elevating the individuals around you, you will discover that they, in turn, will lift you higher than you ever could have climbed on your own. Chapter 6. Disarming Defensiveness. There is a distinct, visceral physical reaction that occurs in the human body the moment our opinions are challenged. You know the feeling intimately. Your chest tightens, your heart rate accelerates, and a sudden flush of heat rises in your face. The adrenaline begins to pump, signaling to your brain that you are under attack and must defend yourself at all costs. In our distant evolutionary past, this biological alarm system protected us from physical predators. Today, however, it is most frequently triggered across conference tables, in living rooms, and during casual conversations when someone simply disagrees with our point of view. When we feel the sting of opposition, our immediate instinct is to strike back, to marshal our facts like soldiers, and to obliterate the other person's argument. We believe that if we can just deploy enough logic, speak with enough volume, and point out the glaring flaws in their reasoning, they will eventually surrender and admit we are right. But this is the great illusion of the verbal battle. You can never truly win an argument. If you lose the debate, you lose it. But if you win it, if you systematically dismantle the other person's ideas and leave them with no logical ground to stand on, you still lose. Why? Because you have stripped them of their dignity. You have humiliated them. You have made them feel inferior, and in doing so, you have deeply wounded their pride. A person who is forced into submission, who is convinced entirely against their own will, still holds tightly to their original opinion in the secret quiet of their own mind. The only difference is that their opinion is now heavily fortified by a bitter, lingering resentment toward you. You may have won the intellectual skirmish, but you have forever lost their goodwill. Consider the dynamic between two brilliant partners who have spent years building a software company from the ground up. They have navigated endless challenges together, but as the company prepares for a massive product launch, a deep fracture appears. One partner is absolutely convinced the product needs 3 more months of refinement to be perfect. The other partner insists that delaying the launch will allow competitors to capture the market and destroy their momentum. The disagreement spills over into a critical late-night meeting. The partner who favors launching immediately comes prepared for war. He brings spreadsheets, market analyses, burn rate charts, and historical case studies of delayed launches that ruined companies. For an hour, he relentlessly pounds the table with irrefutable data. He systematically corners his partner, destroying every counter-argument with brutal, cold logic. Finally, the partner advocating for a delay throws up his hands, completely defeated, and mutters, "Fine, do it your way. I'm done fighting." The victorious partner feels a massive rush of triumph. He proved he was right, and the launch proceeds on his timeline, but what he fails to see is the subtle, catastrophic shift in the room. His partner is no longer an ally, he is a defeated subordinate. Over the next 3 months, the defeated partner works with a cold, mechanical compliance. His passion is entirely gone. He stops offering creative solutions. He stops staying late. And when inevitable problems arise during the launch, he watches passively, secretly hoping for a minor failure to validate his original stance. The company manages to launch the product, but the partnership is irreparably broken, and a year later, the defeated partner leaves the company entirely. The victorious partner won the argument, but the cost of that victory was the destruction of the very foundation of his business. This tragic cycle is fueled by one of the most toxic, relationship-destroying habits human beings possess: the compulsion to tell other people they are wrong. When you look someone in the eye and say, "You are wrong," you are not just offering a correction, you are launching a direct psychological assault on their intelligence, their judgment, and their self-respect. You are essentially saying, "I am smarter than you, my perception of reality is superior to yours, and I am going to force you to change your mind." It is a massive challenge to their ego. It instantly raises their defenses, hardens their heart, and makes them want to strike back. We must recognize that human beings are incredibly careless in the formation of their beliefs. We adopt opinions loosely based on upbringing, social circles, and passing emotions. Yet, the very moment someone threatens to take those beliefs away from us, we are filled with a sudden, illicit passion for them. It is not the ideas themselves that are so dear to us. It is our self-esteem that is being threatened. The word "my" is the most dangerous word in human affairs. We react with the exact same defensive ferocity, whether someone is criticizing our home, our choice of automobile, our political views, or our interpretation of a historical event. When you declare that someone is wrong, you are attacking the "my," and they will spend every ounce of their energy finding excuses to cling to their original assumption, not because it is true, but simply to protect their fragile sense of self. If you are going to prove anything, you must do it so subtly, so adroitly, that the other person never even realizes you are doing it. You must drop the weapons of combat and approach the situation with absolute humility. The most magical, disarming phrase you can ever use in the face of disagreement is this: "I could be wrong. I frequently am. Let us examine the facts together." There is absolute positive magic in admitting your own fallibility. Nobody in the heavens above or on the earth below will ever object to you saying, "I might be wrong." It completely sidesteps the ego. It immediately ends all argument and inspires the other person to be just as fair, open, and broad-minded as you are. It makes them want to drop their own shield and admit that they, too, could possibly be mistaken. Imagine an experienced, masterful architect dealing with a highly demanding, affluent client. The client has no background in engineering, but he has brought in a sketch for a massive, cantilevered balcony he wants added to the master bedroom of his new custom home. The architect takes one look at the sketch and instantly knows that the design is structurally impossible. The weight distribution is completely flawed, and without massive, unsightly support columns, the balcony would eventually collapse. A lesser architect, fueled by professional pride, would immediately say, "You cannot do this. The physics are entirely wrong, and it is structurally impossible." The client, accustomed to getting his way and protective of his own creative idea, would instantly bristle. He would argue, he would question the architect's competence, and the meeting would descend into a hostile power struggle. But the masterful architect understands the delicate nature of the human ego. She looks at the drawing and smiles warmly. "This is a stunning vision," she says. "The aesthetic is incredibly bold. Now, I have some concerns about how the weight will distribute without support columns, but I could absolutely be wrong. I frequently miss things on the first glance, and I want to make sure we explore every possibility to get you exactly what you want. Let's look at the load-bearing calculations together and see if the materials can support this span." Notice what she did. She validated his aesthetic vision. She admitted her own capacity for error. She invited him to be a partner in discovering the truth, rather than an opponent in a debate. They sit down side by side, entirely disarmed. As the architect gently walks him through the basic physics of the span, asking him questions about the material weights, the client slowly begins to see the flaw himself. Because he is not busy defending his intelligence, he is free to actually look at the facts. Within 10 minutes, the client himself says, "You know what, I see the problem here. It's too heavy. We would need a column, and that ruins the look. Let's scrap the balcony and try something else." The architect saved the design, prevented a massive conflict, and deepened the client's respect for her, all by simply refusing to tell him he was wrong. This philosophy of disarming defensiveness requires profound self-mastery. When a disagreement arises, our first natural reaction is always defensive. We must learn to distrust that initial instinctive impression. We must view disagreements not as personal attacks, but as opportunities to be corrected before we make a serious mistake. If there is a point you have not considered, be genuinely thankful that it was brought to your attention. When you find yourself in a tense situation, force yourself to listen first. Give your opponents a wide, expansive space to talk. Let them empty their minds. Do not resist, do not defend, and do not debate. While they are speaking, actively look for areas of agreement. Dwell on the points where your minds meet. And if you realize you have made a mistake in the process, apologize for it immediately and emphatically. Admitting your own errors is the quickest way to disarm an opponent. It proves that you value truth over your own vanity. The ultimate strength in human relations is not found in crushing the opposition. It is found in absorbing it, validating the humanity behind it, and transforming a potential enemy into a collaborative partner. When you abandon the desperate need to be right, when you stop telling the world that it is wrong, and when you approach every interaction with a gentle, inquisitive humility, the sharp edges of the world will soften. You will navigate through life without the constant friction of endless conflict, walking a path paved with mutual respect and profound, enduring goodwill. Chapter 7. The Power of Vulnerability and Warmth. When we realize we have made a terrible, undeniable mistake, our primal instinct is to conceal it. We want to minimize the damage, weave a tapestry of rationalizations, or quickly shift the blame to circumstances entirely beyond our control. It is human nature to build a defensive, frantic wall around our errors to protect our fragile egos. But what if the most powerful move you could make in a moment of catastrophic failure is absolute unconditional surrender? What if instead of waiting for the inevitable storm of criticism to crash down upon you, you walked directly into the center of the room and brought the thunder yourself? If you know, deep down in your bones, that you are entirely in the wrong and that you are going to be severely rebuked, it is infinitely better to beat the other person to the punch. Say about yourself all the derogatory, harsh, and punishing things you know the other person is thinking or intends to say, and say them before they have a chance to utter a single syllable. The psychological shift that occurs when you do this is nothing short of miraculous. When you enthusiastically and aggressively condemn yourself, you take all the wind out of your opponent's sails. You disarm them so completely that the fight is effectively over before it even begins. Picture a logistics director standing in the quiet of her office, holding a catastrophic shipping report. During the chaotic, overwhelming rush of the holiday season, she had signed off on a massive freight protocol for her company's most lucrative new client. But she had misread a critical email and authorized standard packaging instead of the required heavy-duty impact crates. 2 days later, the client received tens of thousands of dollars of shattered, unsellable inventory. The client is livid, threatening to cancel the entire contract and publicly ruin the firm's reputation. The director's boss summons her to his office. She knows she's walking into a firing squad. She could easily blame the chaotic holiday volume, or point out that the client's email was vaguely worded, or claim the warehouse floor manager should have double-checked the order parameters. But she refuses to hide behind alibis. She walks into her boss's office, looks him squarely in the eye, and before he can even open his mouth to shout, she speaks. She tells him that she has made an unforgivable, amateur mistake that threatens the entire quarter. She states clearly that there are absolutely no excuses, that she has been in this industry long enough to know much better, and that she is completely embarrassed and disgusted by her own carelessness. She owns the failure in its absolute entirety, painting her mistake in colors far darker and more critical than her boss ever would have used. Watch what happens to the boss in this precise moment. He had geared himself up for a massive table-pounding confrontation. He was ready to lecture, to reprimand, and to aggressively assert his authority to make sure she understood the gravity of the situation. But her aggressive self-condemnation leaves him with absolutely nowhere to direct his anger. Because he is human, his ego still requires a feeling of importance. But since she has already taken the role of the harsh, unforgiving critic, the only way he can nourish his own self-esteem now is to take the role of the magnanimous forgiver. Instead of firing her or tearing her down, he finds himself physically waving his hand, telling her not to be so incredibly hard on herself. He begins reminding her of her excellent track record, calming her down and shifting the conversation entirely to how they can collaboratively fix the issue. By having the profound, breathtaking courage to admit her fault quickly and emphatically, she saved her career and permanently deepened her manager's trust in her integrity. This awe-inspiring power of vulnerability is perfectly mirrored in how we must approach the hostile aggression of others. When someone comes at you with doubled fists, a red face, and a raised voice, your biological urge is to double your own fists, raise your own voice, and meet their fury with equal force. But meeting hostility with hostility only creates a blazing inferno that burns both parties to the ground. If you want to melt the sharpest, most bitter opposition, you must approach the flames with a profound, unshakable warmth. You must remember that a single drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall, and that gentleness and friendliness are always infinitely stronger than fury and force. Imagine a homeowner who shares a property line with a famously cantankerous, deeply aggressive neighbor. For years, the neighbor has complained bitterly about everything: the noise of the lawnmower, the height of the fence, the leaves blowing across the driveway. One Saturday morning, the homeowner looks out the window and discovers that the neighbor has hired a crew to cut down a beautiful, ancient oak tree that sits directly on their shared property line, aggressively claiming its root system is ruining his concrete driveway. The homeowner rushes out the front door, his heart pounding with adrenaline, fully ready to scream, threaten immediate legal action, and physically block the chainsaws from touching the trunk. But as he marches across the wet grass, he takes a deep breath and forces himself to drop his heavy armor. He walks up to the furious, highly defensive neighbor, who is already puffing up his chest, bracing for a violent screaming match. The homeowner smiles warmly and speaks in a low, incredibly even tone. He does not mention lawsuits, property rights, or the police. Instead, he starts by entirely acknowledging the neighbor's frustration. He says he completely understands how maddening it must be to deal with cracked concrete and the constant, frustrating mess of acorns. He expresses genuine, heartfelt sympathy for the neighbor's expensive driveway repairs. He frames the interaction not as a brutal battle between bitter enemies, but as a mutual, unfortunate problem facing two reasonable men who both care deeply about the beauty and safety of their homes. The neighbor, who was absolutely primed for a violent, drawn-out argument, is entirely disarmed. The homeowner's friendly approach, his unexpected drop of honey, has completely neutralized the burning acid of the neighbor's ill feelings. The hostility evaporates into the morning air because there is simply nothing for it to push against. The neighbor's voice dramatically lowers. He begins to calmly explain his deep worries about the roots destroying his foundation. The homeowner listens patiently, offering nothing but validation, and then gently suggests they pause the crew just for the weekend to bring in an arborist. He suggests they see if a root barrier could save the tree while permanently protecting the driveway at no cost to the neighbor. Because the homeowner approached the explosive situation with pure, unadulterated friendliness, the neighbor agrees without a single fight. The magnificent tree is saved, the driveway is eventually protected, and a decade-long neighborhood Cold War is finally and permanently thawed. We must never forget that the people who come to us irritated, bigoted, or unreasoning are largely the product of their own hidden struggles, their own exhaustion, and their own stressful environments. They are walking through life hungering for sympathy, for understanding, and for someone, anyone, to simply refuse to fight them. When you are wrong, have the breathtaking courage to admit it loudly and instantly, stripping away the need for anyone to conquer you. And when someone else comes to you in anger, have the immense emotional strength to meet them with radical, disarming warmth. When you lay down your sword and approach the world with an open hand, you will find that the universe has absolutely no choice but to open its hands in return. Chapter 8. The Path of Agreement. There is a profound, almost invisible physical current that runs through every human conversation. When two people sit down to negotiate a contract, resolve a bitter family dispute, or make a complex sale, they are usually bracing for an impact. They sit across from one another, entirely focused on the chasm that separates them. They immediately begin discussing the exact points on which they differ, rushing to highlight their disagreements in a desperate attempt to win the other person over. This is a fatal strategic error. When you begin any interaction by highlighting a conflict, you are forcing the other person into an immediate, rigid defensive posture. To truly influence someone, you must never start by pointing out where your paths diverge. You must begin by emphasizing and relentlessly re-emphasizing the things on which you completely agree. You must establish from the very first breath that you are both striving for the exact same ultimate destination, and that your only minor difference is the method of transportation. The secret to establishing this harmony lies in a very simple yet universally neglected technique. You must get the other person saying the word yes right from the outset. When a person says the word no and genuinely means it, they are doing far more than uttering a two-letter syllable. Their entire organism gathers itself into a state of rejection. Their glandular, nervous, and muscular systems physically set themselves on guard against acceptance. They cross their arms, they tighten their jaw, and they withdraw. Once that negative momentum is established, their precious pride demands that they remain entirely consistent with it. Even if they later realize that their no was ill-advised, their ego will not allow them to easily back down. It takes an immense, exhausting amount of force to deflect a heavy object moving rapidly in the wrong direction. But when a person says yes, none of these withdrawal activities take place. The organism is in a forward-moving, accepting, open attitude. By stringing together a series of affirmative responses at the very beginning of a conversation, you set the psychological processes of your listener moving in a positive direction. You are essentially clearing the brush and laying down a smooth, paved road for your ultimate proposal. Imagine a seasoned mediator brought in to resolve a toxic, deeply entrenched dispute between two siblings over the future of a family-owned manufacturing business. The siblings have not spoken without screaming at each other in over 6 months. The older sibling wants to sell the company to a massive conglomerate and retire. The younger sibling wants to secure a massive loan, modernize the factory, and run it for another 30 years. If the mediator walks into the boardroom and immediately brings up the buyout offer or the loan application, the room will explode. The siblings will instantly entrench themselves in their no postures. Instead, the masterful mediator sits down and does not mention the business operations at all. He looks at the older sibling and says, "You want to ensure that the wealth your parents built is preserved for your own children, do you not?" The older sibling nods and says, "Yes, absolutely." The mediator turns to the younger sibling. "And you want to honor the legacy of your family name in this town, correct?" The younger sibling says, "Yes." The mediator then addresses them both. "You both want to avoid a public, drawn-out legal battle that will drain your bank accounts and drag your family's reputation through the mud, right?" They both look at each other, the tension slightly dropping, and agree. Yes. By spending the first 20 minutes of the meeting carefully extracting these fundamental, undeniable agreements, the mediator physically changes the posture of the people in the room. Uncrossed arms, relaxed shoulders, and leaning forward replace the rigid hostility. He has created a powerful psychological momentum of partnership. When they finally transition to discussing the actual fate of the company, the siblings are no longer fighting each other. They are two people standing shoulder to shoulder, trying to solve a mutual puzzle. However, to get people to the point where they are open to agreement, you must often clear away the heavy emotional debris that is blocking their minds. When we want to win someone to our way of thinking, our natural impulse is to do entirely too much talking. We believe that if we just explain our brilliant idea with enough enthusiasm and logic, the other person will surely see the light. But if the person you are talking to has a mind full of their own grievances, their own brilliant ideas, or their own deep frustrations, they are completely deaf to your voice. You cannot pour fresh water into a glass that is already overflowing with muddy water. You must let them empty the glass themselves. You must let them talk themselves out. Patience in these moments is a rare and profound virtue. When someone is expressing a thought you disagree with, the temptation to interrupt is agonizing. You want to jump in, correct their facts, and redirect the narrative, but you must resist that urge with every fiber of your being. Interrupting is deeply dangerous. They will not pay any attention to you while they still have a storm of their own ideas crying out for expression. You must listen patiently with an open mind and a closed mouth. You must sincerely encourage them to express their ideas fully, completely, and without fear of judgment. Consider a brilliant but deeply frustrated graphic designer working at a high-end boutique marketing firm. He feels his creative vision is being constantly and unfairly compromised by the firm's senior account manager. The tension has been building for a year. One afternoon, the designer marches into the firm owner's office carrying his portfolio, his face flushed with indignation. He announces that he is quitting on the spot. He is vibrating with anger, fully prepared to launch into a fiery, bridge-burning speech about artistic integrity, corporate micromanagement, and a toxic workplace. An insecure, inexperienced owner would immediately interrupt. She would defend her account manager, explain the financial realities of client demands, and tell the designer he is being overly sensitive. That would instantly result in a bitter shouting match, and the firm would lose one of its most talented creators. But this owner is deeply wise. She pushes her keyboard away, closes her laptop, looks the designer in the eyes, and simply says, "Tell me everything. I want to hear it all." And then she remains entirely, resolutely silent. For 45 uninterrupted minutes, the designer paces the office. He pours out every frustration, every perceived slight, and every brilliant design he feels was smothered by the account manager. He points at his portfolio, his voice rising and falling with emotion. The owner does not check her watch. She does not offer a single counter-argument. She just nods, offers small sounds of validation, and provides an immense, safe stage for his anger. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the designer's frantic pacing slows down. The sharp edge of his voice softens. The massive reservoir of tension within him is drained. Because he met absolutely no resistance, his fury burns itself out. He eventually sits down in the chair opposite her desk, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. By the time he finishes talking, he is no longer a hostile employee ready to burn the building down. He is a tired, passionate artist who feels completely and profoundly understood. Only then, into that quiet, empty space, does the owner speak. Because his mind is now clear, he is finally open to hearing her perspective on how they can collaboratively fix the internal process. He does not quit. The relationship is permanently strengthened. When you master the art of stepping back, when you carefully weave a path of early, honest agreements and offer the profound, validating gift of a silent, listening ear, you stop pushing against locked doors. You remove the friction from human interaction. You allow people to lower their own defenses, empty their own burdens, and ultimately open the doors themselves. Chapter 9. Collaborative Persuasion. We are inherently distrustful of ideas that are handed to us on a silver platter. It is a fundamental quirk of human nature that we fiercely defend the conclusions we reach on our own, while simultaneously looking for the hidden flaws in any concept that is forced upon us by someone else. When you understand this, you realize just how incredibly foolish it is to try and ram your opinions down the throats of other people. If you want someone to adopt a new way of thinking, embrace a new project, or change their behavior, presenting them with a fully formed, rigid demand is the quickest way to guarantee their resistance. To truly persuade, you must master the delicate art of the gentle suggestion. You must learn how to plant a seed in the fertile soil of someone else's mind and then step back, allowing them to cultivate it until they proudly believe they planted it themselves. However, before you can plant that seed, there is a profound psychological prerequisite. You must genuinely and honestly try to see the world from their point of view. You cannot guide someone to a new destination if you have absolutely no idea where they are currently standing. Consider how intensely focused you are on your own daily life. You care deeply about your own schedule, your own financial pressures, your own minor aches and pains, and your own ambitions. Now pause and realize that every single person you interact with feels that exact same intense, all-consuming focus on their own reality. What seems like a trivial issue to you might be the center of their universe. If you want to influence them, you must temporarily set aside your own ego and look at the situation through the specific lens of their fears, their desires, and their pride. Imagine the manager of a sprawling, high-end residential community who is constantly battling a group of local teenagers. Every afternoon, the teenagers gather in the beautifully manicured central plaza to ride their skateboards, grinding their wheels against the expensive marble retaining walls and weaving dangerously through the returning commuters. The manager is furious. He sees thousands of dollars in property damage and a massive liability issue. His initial approach is driven entirely by his own worldview. He posts stern warning signs, he shouts at the teenagers from across the courtyard, and he threatens to call the local authorities. The result is completely predictable. The teenagers scatter when he approaches, but the moment his shift ends, they return with a vengeance. They deface his warning signs and deliberately ride louder and more recklessly. The manager is trying to force his adult perspective of property value and legal liability onto a group of adolescents who only care about adrenaline, peer respect, and having a space to call their own. He is commanding them to care about his problems, which is a guaranteed recipe for rebellion. One afternoon, completely exhausted by the endless conflict, the manager decides to fundamentally shift his perspective. He forces himself to look at the plaza through their eyes. He realizes they are not malicious vandals. They are just kids with high energy drawn to the only smooth, wide-open concrete in the neighborhood. They want a challenge, and they want to be treated with a baseline of respect. The next day, he walks out to the plaza. He leaves his clipboard and his scowl in the office. He walks up to the oldest teenager, but he does not mention rules, property damage, or the police. Instead, he compliments the teenager on a particularly difficult jump he just witnessed. He speaks to them as equals. Then he leans in and says that the community board has actually been looking at an abandoned paved overflow lot on the far edge of the property. He explains that he knows absolutely nothing about skateboarding, but he wants their expert advice. If the board were to donate that space, how would the teenagers design it? What makes a good surface? What kind of ramps would they actually use? By asking for their expertise, he completely disarms their hostility. He validates their passion. By the end of the week, the teenagers are sitting in his office, proudly showing him rough sketches of a makeshift skate park. They voluntarily stop riding in the central plaza, not because they were ordered to, but because they are now deeply invested partners in a new project. The manager saw the world through their eyes, and by doing so, he transformed them from defiant adversaries into enthusiastic collaborators. This leads us to the ultimate mechanism of influence, letting the other person feel that the idea is theirs. In the professional world, this is often the dividing line between a struggling worker and an indispensable, highly trusted advisor. When we want credit, we push our finished ideas aggressively. But when we want results, we must be willing to sacrifice the petty ego of needing the applause. Consider an ambitious copywriter working at a competitive advertising agency, reporting to a notoriously difficult creative director. For months, the copywriter has been bringing perfectly polished, finalized ad campaigns to the director's desk. The director, feeling the constant need to assert his authority and validate his senior position, inevitably tears the finished campaigns apart. He rejects the core concepts, rewrites the slogans, and fundamentally alters the work just to prove his superior taste. The copywriter is left exhausted, demoralized, and resentful, feeling that her brilliant ideas are being constantly smothered. Realizing that fighting for her completed vision is a losing battle, she changes her tactics. For the next major national account, she does not bring a finished, glossy presentation. Instead, she brings 3 rough, unpolished conceptual outlines. She walks into the director's office, sets the papers on his desk, and says she is stuck. She explains that she has a decent foundation but cannot quite figure out how to bring the campaign to life, and she desperately needs his brilliant eye to connect the dots. She asks for his input. The director, immensely flattered by the appeal to his expertise, leans over the desk. He picks up a red pen and begins pointing out adjustments, mixing elements from the different rough concepts and shaping the narrative arc. He is energized and engaged. A few days later, the copywriter returns with the finalized artwork and copy, perfectly reflecting the exact suggestions the director made. The director looks at it, smiles broadly, and approves it without a single revision. Why did he approve it so easily? Because he did not have to evaluate someone else's completed work. He was admiring his own creation. The copywriter did not have to sell him the campaign. She let him sell himself. She guided him to the exact destination she wanted, but she let him hold the steering wheel the entire time. If you want to move through the world with profound, frictionless influence, you must surrender the desperate need to be the smartest person in the room. You must ask thoughtful questions instead of giving rigid orders. You must seek out the motives, fears, and desires of the person sitting across from you, stepping out of your own shoes and into theirs. When you consult people about their wishes, and when you allow them to take ownership of the solutions, you remove the barriers of pride and ego. When people believe they are acting on their own volition, creating their own outcomes, there is absolutely no limit to the cooperation they will offer you. Chapter 10. The High Road of Empathy. Wouldn't you love to possess a magic phrase that could instantly stop an argument, evaporate ill feelings, create profound goodwill, and make even the most unreasonable person listen to you with rapt attention? It sounds like a fantasy, but this phrase actually exists. It is simple, it is entirely free, and it goes exactly like this. I do not blame you one single bit for feeling exactly the way you do. If I were in your shoes, I would undoubtedly feel the exact same way. An answer like that will soften the most cantankerous, rigid, and hostile person alive. And the true beauty of this phrase is that you can say it with absolute 100% sincerity. Because if you were the other person, you would indeed feel exactly as they do. This requires a leap of profound empathy. You must realize that if you had inherited the exact same temperament, the same physical makeup, the same childhood environment, and the exact same deeply ingrained experiences as the person screaming at you, you would be standing where they are standing, saying exactly what they are saying. We deserve very little credit for being who we are, and we must realize that the people who come to us irritated, bigoted, and unreasoning deserve very little discredit for being who they are. They are the product of circumstances largely beyond their control. When you truly internalize this, your anger dissolves into a deep, abiding pity. You begin to look at the angry, difficult people in your life and say to yourself, there, but for the grace of life's unpredictable lottery, go I. Imagine an exhausted gate agent working at a major international airport during the week of a massive, unprecedented winter blizzard. The terminal is a chaotic, echoing nightmare of delayed flights, sleeping passengers, and frayed nerves. The agent has been working for 14 hours, dealing with a relentless wave of frustration. Suddenly, a man in a rumpled suit charges the desk. His face is purple with rage. He slams his fist on the counter and begins screaming at the agent, demanding that she somehow magically conjure a flight to Chicago. He curses her, blames the airline, and threatens to have her fired. The agent's biological response is screaming at her to fight back. She holds the power to call security, to revoke his ticket, or to angrily point out the massive snowstorm visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her. But she takes a deep breath and looks past the screaming monster to see the desperate human being underneath. She looks him in the eye and in a soft, incredibly even voice says, I do not blame you at all for being absolutely furious. If I were standing where you are, realizing I was going to miss my destination, I would be just as incredibly angry and heartbroken as you are right now. It is a completely miserable situation. The transformation is instantaneous and breathtaking. The man freezes. He had prepared for a brutal fight, but he has just been met with total, unconditional understanding. His shoulders drop. The anger, having no wall to crash against, simply dissipates. He lets out a long, ragged sigh, rubs his face, and quietly explains that he is trying to make it to his daughter's wedding. He apologizes for yelling. He was not truly angry at the agent. He was terrified and feeling utterly powerless. 3/4 of the people you will ever meet in your life are hungering and thirsting for this exact kind of sympathy. They are walking through the world feeling profoundly misunderstood. Give them your sympathy, offer them your genuine understanding, and they will love you for it. But what happens when sympathy is not quite enough? What happens when you are dealing with someone who is actively trying to back out of a commitment, or who is refusing to fulfill their obligations? How do you move them to positive action without resorting to threats or legal warfare? You do it by recognizing another universal truth about the human heart. We are all, deep down, profound idealists. We all desperately want to view ourselves as the heroes of our own stories. Every person usually has two reasons for doing anything. One reason that sounds incredibly noble and good, and the real reason. The person themselves will always think of the real reason. You do not need to highlight it for them. But because we all want to think highly of ourselves, we are deeply motivated by appeals to our highest ideals. If you want to change someone's behavior when they are acting poorly, you must appeal to their nobler motives. You must hold up a mirror that reflects not their current bad behavior, but the absolute best version of who they could possibly be. Consider a freelance software architect who has spent 8 grueling months building a complex, customized internal database for a medium-sized manufacturing enterprise. The work was exhausting, but he delivered a flawless product on time. However, when his final invoice for $30,000 comes due, the CEO of the enterprise suddenly stalls. The CEO claims, based on a minor, highly debatable technicality in the contract, that the software does not perform a specific predictive function, and he refuses to issue the final payment. The software architect is devastated and furious. He knows the CEO is simply experiencing cash flow problems and is using the technicality as a shield to avoid paying his debt. The architect could hire an expensive lawyer, threaten to shut down the database, or write a blistering public review. But that would lead to a bitter, drawn-out war. Instead, he secures a face-to-face meeting with the CEO. He walks into the spacious, opulent office, but he does not bring the contract and he does not mention lawyers. He sits down and says, "I have been in this industry for a decade, and long before I took this job, your reputation preceded you. Everyone I spoke with told me that you were a leader of absolute, unshakable integrity. They told me you were a person who honors their word above all else, someone whose handshake is stronger than iron. I believed them, which is why I poured my heart into this project and never once demanded staggered payments. I am going to leave my final invoice right here on your desk. I am going to step back. If you can look me in the eye and tell me, as a person of honor, that I did not deliver exactly what I promised, I will walk out of this office and I will never ask you for that money again. The choice belongs entirely to you." The CEO is completely stunned. He had prepared for a screaming match about contract clauses and software parameters. Instead, he has been handed a glowing, idealized portrait of his own character. The architect has appealed directly to his nobler motives. To refuse the payment now would be to actively shatter his own self-image as a highly ethical, honorable business leader. Confronted with the choice of saving $30,000 or saving his own profound sense of honor, the CEO reaches into his desk, pulls out his checkbook, and pays the invoice in full. When you treat people as if they are fundamentally decent, fair, and honorable, they will almost always strive to prove you right. This is the ultimate high road of empathy. It is the realization that human relations are not a battlefield where we must constantly conquer, defend, and outmaneuver one another. Life is far too short and the human heart is far too fragile for us to spend our days kicking over beehives and forcing our opinions down the throats of our neighbors. True influence, true leadership, and true connection are born in the quiet moments when we set aside our own egos. They are born when we smile warmly at a stranger, when we remember a name, when we listen with profound, unbroken silence, and when we grant others the dignity of their own importance. When you learn to look at the world through the eyes of the people around you, when you offer them the sympathy they are starving for, and when you appeal to the absolute best angels of their nature, you will never have to force anyone to walk with you. You will have mastered the delicate, beautiful art of human connection, and you will find that the world will gladly and joyfully open its doors to you wherever you may go.